Very few automobiles ever become larger than the companies that created them. Ferrari will always be bigger than any single Ferrari. Porsche will always be greater than one particular 911. But every once in a while, a manufacturer accidentally builds something so extraordinary that it develops an identity of its own. A machine that escapes the boundaries of marketing, sales figures, and even the brand itself. For Nissan, that machine was the Skyline GT-R R34. Today, millions of people recognize the name GT-R even if they know almost nothing about Nissan. Some discovered it through racing games. Others through movies. Many fell in love with its legendary engine or its limitless tuning potential. Yet remarkably, almost none of those things explain why the R34 became one of the most celebrated performance cars in history. The truth is far more fascinating. The Skyline GT-R wasn't created to become a global icon. It wasn't designed to dominate Hollywood, inspire an entire generation of enthusiasts, or sell for hundreds of thousands of dollars decades later. It was simply Nissan's answer to one question: what happens when engineers are given almost complete freedom to build the ultimate driver's machine? To understand why the R34 became something far greater than a sports car, we have to go back long before 1999. The Skyline name had existed since the late 1950s, originally developed by Prince Motor Company before Nissan absorbed the brand. Over the following decades, Skyline evolved from an ordinary family sedan into something much more ambitious. By the late 1960s, the first GT-R had already established itself on Japanese racetracks, earning an extraordinary reputation through countless victories. But it wasn't until the late 1980s that the legend truly began. The R32 GT-R arrived in 1989 and completely changed the automotive world. Equipped with an advanced all-wheel drive system, sophisticated electronics, and an engine that seemed almost impossible to break, it dominated touring car championships so completely that Australian journalists famously gave it a nickname that would follow every GT-R for decades: Godzilla. A monster from Japan that destroyed everything standing in its way. That reputation only grew stronger with the arrival of the R33, but inside Nissan, engineers believed they could do even better. Development of the R34 wasn't about creating an entirely new car. It was about perfecting every weakness they had discovered after years of racing and road testing. The wheelbase became shorter, improving agility without sacrificing stability. The chassis grew significantly stiffer, increasing precision under hard cornering. Weight distribution was carefully refined. Aerodynamics received countless subtle improvements. Nothing was redesigned for appearance alone. Every change had a measurable engineering purpose. Personally, I think that's what separates the R34 from so many other performance cars of its era. Nissan wasn't trying to impress customers with dramatic styling or outrageous horsepower figures. The company focused almost obsessively on balance, confidence, and mechanical capability. The goal wasn't to build the fastest car in a straight line. It was to build a machine that could perform under almost any conditions with extraordinary consistency. At the center of that philosophy sat one of the most famous engines ever created, the RB26 DETT. Even people who have never owned a Nissan often recognize those 6 letters instantly. The twin-turbocharged 2.6-liter inline-six officially produced 276 horsepower, complying with Japan's famous gentleman's agreement that limited advertised output among domestic manufacturers. But almost everyone inside the automotive industry understood that figure wasn't entirely honest. Independent testing repeatedly suggested the real power was significantly higher, and more importantly, the RB26 possessed something far more valuable than impressive factory numbers. It possessed almost limitless potential. Built with an exceptionally strong iron block, forged internals, and engineering margins far beyond what most manufacturers considered necessary, the RB26 quickly developed a reputation for surviving power levels that would destroy ordinary production engines. While many sports cars reached their limits after modest modifications, the Skyline seemed almost eager for more. 400 horsepower became common. Then 500. 600. Eventually, dedicated builders pushed the platform beyond 1,000 horsepower, transforming the RB26 into one of the most respected tuning engines ever produced. But despite all the attention surrounding its engine, the GT-R's greatest innovation wasn't hidden beneath the hood. It was hidden underneath the car itself. Nissan equipped the R34 with the incredibly sophisticated ATTESA ETS Pro all-wheel drive system, technology that continuously analyzed wheel speed, steering input, throttle position, and countless other variables before intelligently distributing power exactly where it was needed. Under normal conditions, the car behaved primarily like a rear-wheel drive sports coupe, preserving the playful balance enthusiasts loved. But the instant traction began disappearing, the The system reacted almost faster than the driver could think, sending torque to the front wheels and maintaining astonishing stability. At a time when many performance cars still relied almost entirely on mechanical grip and driver instinct, the GT-R was already demonstrating how intelligent electronics could enhance performance without removing driver involvement. Combined with Super-HICAS four-wheel steering, advanced suspension geometry, and an exceptionally rigid chassis, the result was a car that inspired extraordinary confidence at speeds where many rivals began feeling nervous. It wasn't simply quick. It felt almost impossible to intimidate. And yet, despite all of this remarkable engineering, nobody at Nissan could have imagined what was about to happen. Because the Skyline GT-R wasn't just about to become Japan's greatest performance car. It was about to become something much larger than Nissan itself. When the Skyline GT-R R34 officially arrived in 1999, Nissan believed it had built the ultimate evolution of everything the GT-R name represented. The engineers celebrated its sharper chassis, its improved electronics, and its incredible balance. Journalists praised its precision and confidence at the limit. Racing teams admired its durability. Yet nobody inside Nissan realized they had accidentally created something that would escape the automotive industry entirely. The R34 wasn't just becoming a successful sports car. It was becoming a symbol. And symbols don't follow the same rules as ordinary machines. Ironically, one of the biggest reasons for the GT-R's legendary status was the fact that millions of people couldn't buy one. Unlike many European performance cars, the Skyline GT-R was never officially sold in the United States. Nissan had no plans to homologate the R34 for the American market, largely because of emissions regulations, crash standards, and the enormous cost of certification. To executives, it was simply a business decision. But to enthusiasts, it transformed the Skyline into something far more desirable. Human nature has always worked the same way. The harder something is to obtain, the more people want it. The R34 became an automotive forbidden fruit. Americans watched videos from Japan, read magazine articles, imported scale models, played racing games, and dreamed about owning a car they legally couldn't have. Personally, I think that restriction made the Skyline even more famous than if Nissan had sold thousands of them worldwide. Scarcity creates mythology. Every generation has a machine that people grow up chasing but cannot reach. For many enthusiasts born in the 1990s and early 2000s, the R34 became exactly that dream. Then came a revolution that nobody at Nissan could have predicted. It didn't happen at a racetrack. It didn't happen in a showroom. It happened inside living rooms around the world. The Gran Turismo series introduced millions of players to the Skyline GT-R suddenly. People who had never heard of Japanese touring car racing were spending hours driving virtual R34s around Suzuka, Trial Mountain, Laguna Seca, and the Nürburgring. Unlike many racing games of the era that treated cars as simple statistics, Gran Turismo celebrated engineering. Every vehicle had a personality. Every modification mattered. Every upgrade changed the driving experience. And again, players discovered the same thing. The Skyline GT-R was unbelievably capable. For countless young enthusiasts, the R34 wasn't the first Japanese sports car they drove. It was the first performance car they ever truly understood. Long before they could legally drive on real roads, they already knew what the RB26 sounded like at full boost. They knew how ATTESA behaved exiting corners. They knew how stable the chassis felt at high speed. A video game had done something traditional advertising never could. It created an emotional connection with an entire generation. Then Hollywood multiplied that effect. When the Skyline appeared on movie screens in the early 2000s, it instantly reached audiences who had never opened a car magazine or watched a motorsport event. But here's what's remarkable. The films alone didn't create the legend. Plenty of cars have appeared in blockbuster movies before disappearing into history. The Skyline survived because the engineering lived up to the image. Behind the dramatic cinematography was a machine that genuinely deserved its reputation. That authenticity became the foundation of one of the greatest tuning cultures the automotive world has ever seen. Unlike many high-performance cars that became unreliable once owners chased more power, the RB26 seemed almost designed for modification. The iron block tolerated enormous boost pressures. The bottom end proved astonishingly durable. Cylinder heads flowed exceptionally well. The aftermarket exploded almost overnight. Companies such as HKS, Mines, Nismo, Trust, Tomei, Blitz, and JUN spent years developing stronger internals, larger turbochargers, improved fuel systems, advanced engine management, and complete race packages. Every new record inspired someone else to go even further. 400 horsepower stopped being impressive. Then 600 became common. Eventually, 1,000 horsepower transformed from fantasy into reality. Some dedicated drag builds pushed well beyond that, proving the RB26 possessed a strength few production engines in history could match. But perhaps the most fascinating part of the Skyline story is that raw horsepower was never the main reason people respected it. The greatest builders didn't simply make the car faster. They preserved what made it special. Even heavily modified GT-Rs often retained remarkable balance. The steering remained communicative. The chassis stayed composed. The ATTESA system continued delivering astonishing traction. More power never completely erased the car's original personality. That's incredibly rare. Many modified performance cars lose the qualities that made them enjoyable in the first place. The Skyline somehow managed to evolve without forgetting who it was. Meanwhile, Nissan itself was changing. Financial struggles forced the company into difficult decisions. Carlos Ghosn's restructuring transformed Nissan's priorities, focusing more heavily on profitability than ambitious engineering projects. The Skyline GT-R quietly disappeared from production in 2002. For several years, there was no successor. Many enthusiasts feared the legend had reached its final chapter. But something unusual happened. Instead of fading away, the R34 became even more valuable. Its absence only made the legend stronger. As prices climbed and import laws slowly moved toward the famous 25-year exemption in the United States, anticipation reached levels almost never seen for a production automobile. People weren't just waiting to buy a used Nissan. They were waiting to fulfill a dream they had carried since childhood. And by that point, the Skyline GT-R R34 was no longer just a sports car from Japan. It had become one of the most recognizable performance icons the world had ever seen. The Nissan Skyline GT-R R34 was never the fastest production car in the world. It never claimed the absolute top-speed crown, it never became the most expensive supercar of its era, and it certainly wasn't produced in the tiny numbers that usually define automotive exclusivity. Yet somehow, more than 2 decades after production ended, it remains one of the most desired performance cars on the planet. Personally, I think that's because people don't remember the R34 for what it achieved on paper. They remember how it made them feel. It represented possibility. It proved that engineering could matter more than marketing, that intelligence could outperform brute force, and that a perfectly balanced machine could become far more influential than a car chasing the biggest horsepower number. Very few automobiles have inspired an entire generation the way the Skyline did. It introduced millions of people to Japanese performance engineering. It turned countless teenagers into lifelong enthusiasts through racing games, magazines, motorsport, and tuning culture. For many drivers, the Skyline wasn't simply the first dream car they ever wanted. It became the reason they fell in love with cars in the first place. That kind of influence cannot be measured by sales figures or lap times. The RB26 DETT became one of the greatest tuning engines ever created, proving that reliability and enormous performance could exist together. The ATTESA ETS Pro system demonstrated that intelligent all-wheel drive could make a performance car faster without making it less exciting. The chassis showed that balance would always outperform excess. And together, those engineering decisions created something extraordinary. Not just a great Nissan, but one of the greatest driver's cars of its generation. Looking back today, it's fascinating how the Skyline GT-R eventually escaped the shadow of the company that built it. Around the world, people proudly wear GT-R shirts without ever mentioning Nissan. Model cars, posters, video games, documentaries, and entire YouTube channels celebrate the R34 as if it were a brand of its own. That's an incredibly rare achievement. Usually, legendary cars elevate their manufacturers. In this case, the Skyline became so iconic that it almost transcended Nissan itself. Even the long wait for legal importation into the United States became part of the legend. For years, enthusiasts counted the days until the famous 25-year rule finally allowed them to own the car they had dreamed about since childhood. By the time those restrictions expired, prices had already skyrocketed. What had once been an attainable Japanese sports car had transformed into one of the world's most collectible modern classics. Ironically, the very laws that kept Americans away from the Skyline helped make it even more desirable. Sometimes the greatest legends aren't created by availability. They're created by anticipation. Today, manufacturers build cars with more horsepower, quicker acceleration, and technology the engineers of the late 1990s could only dream about. Yet despite all that progress, people still compare new performance cars to the R34. That's the ultimate sign of greatness. The benchmark never stopped being relevant. The Skyline GT-R R34 didn't become legendary because it was perfect. It became legendary because it inspired millions of people to care about engineering, motorsport, and driving in a way very few cars ever have. Some automobiles dominate headlines for a few years before quietly disappearing. Others become part of automotive history forever. The R34 belongs to the second group. It wasn't simply one of Nissan's greatest achievements. It became one of the defining performance cars of an entire generation, proving that true legends are remembered not because they were the fastest, but because they changed the way the world looked at cars. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for more stories about the world's most legendary automobiles. Every subscription helps the channel continue bringing these incredible automotive stories back to life. And now I'd love to hear your opinion. Do you think the Nissan Skyline GT-R R34 truly deserves its status as the greatest JDM performance car ever built, or would you choose another Japanese icon instead? Let me know your answer in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next documentary.